Now, you guys know I love a good internet debate, and this one is a doozy. Pages and pages of arguments from sailors and non sailors and transmission experts and engineers. This week on Everything You Need to Know, should you leave your sailboat in neutral or put it in gear while you're sailing? For those of you who don't sail, or maybe don't have a sailboat, or do have a sailboat maybe without an inboard engine, this may have never crossed your mind. But trust me, it's an age-old debate, and not only are we talking about it today, I've actually got some footage for you guys from inside a sailboat transmission while it spins. But before we get there, just what exactly am I talking about? Well, as you know, under an inboard engine sailboat, there's a propeller, and it connects through a shaft or a sail drive, which leads to some sort of a gearbox or a transmission. Then that leads to the engine. Now, obviously, when you're motoring along, the engine is spinning, if it runs, which spins the input side of the transmission or gearbox. And if the boat is in forward or reverse, it spins the propeller and thrusts the boat forward or backward. But what about when you shut the engine off and you're moving forward through the water under sail? On Lady K, which is my first inboard engine sailboat, I noticed this on my first sail. I put up the sails, I trimmed them, and I popped the transmission in neutral and I shut the diesel down, as I thought you would normally do. It's my favorite moment in sailing too. As soon as you're up and running under sail, you got a little bit of heel, and you hit the key and you shut that diesel off, dead silence, and I love it. So the boat pushed forward at about 6 knots, and as I had the engine shut down, I continued to trim the sails until I was happy with the telltale position and the speed of the boat. I sat down and I opened my favorite cold beverage, and I started to relax all my worries away, like you do on a sailboat, when I started to hear a noise and feel a vibration. And as I just got the boat, it was one of my first sails, I was very alert toward noises and vibrations, and I started to chase it down and trace where it might be coming from, a little bit worried. So it was under the cockpit floor that the noise was coming from, and I can feel the floor vibrations. So I opened the locker and I stuck my head in there, and behind a panel is where the sail drive transmission lives, and I can hear it whirring around as the prop spun. So this led me to the first time I had ever even considered this to be a problem or something you'd have to deal with. I'd never had an inboard boat, but I am very mechanical. I understood that the forward motion of the boat through the water was spinning the prop and thus spinning the guts of the transmission, or at least half of them, because it was in neutral. So I popped the shifter into reverse, and the whirring sound immediately went away, but the boat slowed down, noticeably. Back into neutral, and the boat sped up, but the noise came back. So herein lies the debate. Do you sail around in neutral, letting the prop spin and the transmission whir, or do you leave it in gear to stop that from happening? My thoughts at the time, and honestly ever since, were that I don't want unnecessary wear on the insides of the transmission. So I'll take the hit on speed every time, and I'll keep it in gear so that it's not moving. I've always been in that camp, and I was doing some reading. Volvo, the makers of my sail drive, do suggest that you leave it in reverse while you're sailing. So I've scoured the internet for other opinions, and there are folks out there who suggest it may be worse for the drivetrain to remain locked in gear with the force of the prop trying to spin against it. But I'm not really buying that, because in my mind, if the running gear can stand up to all the torque my diesel puts out, I don't think it's going to have a problem standing up to holding the prop stationary. The only real argument that I can find and that I can side with for leaving it in neutral and letting it spin is a loss of speed. Having a stationary prop is a lot like dragging a bucket behind the boat from a rope. Now, maybe I am exaggerating a little bit to make a point, but as a racer at heart, that half knot of speed that I lose truly does matter to me, and I've measured it. It's a half a knot. Now, one thing should be said, if you are of the leave it in gear camp like I am, it is important to take the pressure off the prop before you try to put that transmission back in neutral. Some won't even shift back to neutral while you're sailing because the prop is so locked up. The load on the prop can make it really hard to shift on Lady K, so I'll always spill the sails and get the boat to almost completely stop before I pop it in neutral. Now we'll get into the video of the inside of the transmission, but before we do, Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make this whole channel possible. Thank you so much, guys. My friend Eldon, who's likely the smartest person I know when it comes to this kind of stuff, has an Endeavour 37 with a big diesel and a very big prop driven by a shaft. He needed to do some service work on the transmission before a huge trip that he's going to be taking this summer. And rather than fixing things on the boat, as you might do, he took the whole transmission to his shop. And he decided that while he had it apart, he was going to film the inside of the gearbox and try to answer this age-old debate for us. Here's what he found.
So this is Hearth Borg-Warner HBW 125, which is similar to the HBW 10, 150, and other various models. Everyone wonders what happens when you're sailing and the transmission's in neutral. So I'm turning the propeller end by hand, and if you look, you can see right down in here that this part right there, right in front of the bearing, is what they call a thrust washer. There's one at each end. And you can see that the thrust washer turns against the gear that doesn't turn. And that's a wear point. And when those thrust washers wear thin, you're rebuilding your transmission. As well, the clutch discs, every other one. One's a steel one, the next one beside it is what they call a friction disc. On this one, there's 4 of each for forward and 4 of each for reverse. So as you're sailing in neutral, you can tell the black ones are rotating against the brown friction discs, and there's a little slop in there. They're not tight. And when you're in service, this motion of the shift link assembly would pick up transmission fluid and lubricate this and keep it cool with the lubricant. But if you just shift into reverse, nothing turns, although you get more drag from your propeller. Get a folding or feathering propeller to solve that. But then you totally eliminate the wear of sailing with the clutch in neutral.
Now, I don't have the same gearbox as Eldon, but I'd imagine the inner workings of most of these are very similar, and knowing what he showed us in this video, I'm still in the leave it in gear camp, to be honest. I'd much rather be a little bit slower than having to wear anything that I don't want to have to replace, and as you saw, that would be a total transmission rebuild, not some easy thing. The be-all and end-all here is obviously a prop that feathers or folds, and that truly is the right solution. Then the prop blades remove themselves from the effort of the water that it's putting against them, and then negate this problem entirely, but that comes with a problem of its own. Every sailboat should have one of these fancy props if we could afford it, and that's the problem. I've looked at such a prop for Lady K way back before I ever even left the Great Lakes with her, and even a used feathering or folding prop was going to run me about $2,000 for a used prop. And $2,000 can go a long way toward a lot of other things, like in my case, I bought a dinghy. So I sacrificed the speed and used that money elsewhere. What do you do for your prop? Do you leave it in neutral or do you put it in gear while you're sailing? Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That's it for this week, guys. If you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you all next week.